Professor David Lowe is a man of many parts. He is the inaugural director of Deakin University's Alfred Deakin Research Institute. Professor Lowe is one of the main drivers too behind the creation of the Australian Policy History Network, a collaboration that has as its main aim encouraging Australian politicians and policymakers to learn from history.
One of the best things about recent developments here in the Institute is my involvement in setting up the Australian Policy and History Network. It's a network which comprises some co-founders, ourselves, also people from the University of New England, the Australian National University and the History Council of New South Wales, but also a broader community of historians whom we tap into. And we think it's timely that this network be set up because it's very important that historians speak to current policy issues. It's important for a number of ways. One is that policymakers and politicians often simply don't have time to develop a historical consciousness when they're grappling with big problems. We all know that public servants are very starved for time. So for us to provide short, synthesised, very digestible pieces of historical work that seem to engage with current problems of the day seems to us to be a really useful thing. Furthermore, if we're not proactive about this, then politicians can get away with things. They can we know they're always concerned to provide legitimacy and authority to their decisions, and they can sometimes invoke history in ways that are sloppy or dangerous and misinformed. I suppose the example I can think of is Tony Blair in 2003, when in a speech talking about the so-called war on terror, he claimed that history provided no guidance anymore. The situation we were in was so unique as to draw on no guidance from historical lessons. Now, not only is this wrong, and historians pointed this out quite quickly, with reference to the legacy of Britain in the Middle East, for example, but it's also dangerous because what Blair was trying to do was to set himself free of public scrutiny. He was trying to carve out a space in which people couldn't argue with him. So we're concerned to demonstrate that history can provide markers, guidance. It can demonstrate where there's continuity and where there are breaks in things, big problems that people are talking about today. History is often also used as a kind of metaphor or in an allegorical sense for what people are facing today. That often happens in crisis-like situations. If we go back to the American decision in the mid-1960s, for example, to escalate the war in Vietnam, to send the troops in, there's a key meeting that historians know well held by President Lyndon Johnson, in which he asked his advisors what to do. What do we do at this situation? And for about the next 20 minutes, it was just a war of history. People said, this is like Munich in the lead up to World War II, unless we get tough, things will get worse. Others said, well, no, actually, it's a bit like the French and their battle they had to stay in Vietnam. Others said, well, actually, no, it's more like the way in which we got involved in Korea. And the way in which decisions were taken as a result of that conversation reflected whose version of history was being most accepted. So we know it's human behaviour in crisis-like moments. When you're under stress, you reach for some kind of allegory. What you know might apply to this situation. And so for historians to be engaged on this score too seems to us to be really relevant. So the Australian Policy and History Network was launched at the end of March this year. It follows a very successful British model which was launched in 2003. And they've been so successful in joining the dots between historians, the media and policymakers that some of their members are sometimes taken to Whitehall for briefings with cabinet ministers. They sometimes have a regular gig in a prominent British newspaper such as The Guardian, such has been their impact and influence. We're optimistic that the Australian version of that, the Australian network, might have similar impact.